Nicole Sherbiny is the real villain in her relationship with Mahmoud, but what makes her worse than Angela Deem or Big Ed Brown? 90-Day Fiancé, Happily Ever After. Star Nicole Sherbiny is the biggest villain of Season 8 so far. Nicole from Los Angeles is a 40-year-old woman married to 31-year-old Mahmoud El Sherbiny from Egypt for 5 years. Nicole and Mahmoud have clashed thanks to their different lifestyles and beliefs from the other way Season 4. But things have gotten intense since his arrival in the U.S. Nicole had wandered into a fabric store on the last day of her magical Egypt store where she saw a super cute boy with big brown eyes and big muscles. Mahmoud asked Nicole if she liked Egypt, and when she said she'd like to stay there, he said she should and be his wife. Nicole thought Mahmoud was being funny, but she spent her last day in Cairo with Mahmoud. They talked every day and slowly fell in love. Nicole had been in America for 5 days when Mahmoud asked her to marry him. She had never even thought of being a wife before. She had always been single and independent, but Nicole said yes. 7 days after Mahmoud asked Nicole to marry her, she found herself in Egypt. She married him at the Justice Department, and not long after that, they had a wedding party. Nicole had told no one about her getting married. She claimed she was so madly in love with Mahmoud and so excited about the new life she was living. She thought the magic was always going to be like that while she lived in Egypt. However, Nicole said what happened next was a rude awakening. It was much different than what she thought. Nicole felt like she needed to go back to America after 2 months. Nicole had learned within a week about how different her life was in Egypt compared to how she lived in the U.S. She said she couldn't drive or speak the language and was struggling with culture shock. After 2 months, Nicole and Mahmoud applied for a spousal visa, so he could come to the U.S. in the meantime. Nicole went back and forth to Egypt 6 times when things started to fall apart. They were married for 11 months when Nicole told Mahmoud she wanted a divorce. She canceled his visa and blocked him. 90 Days Nicole said she was divorcing Mahmoud because he wanted to be married to somebody who lived up to his standards of who a wife should be. She didn't like that Mahmoud was changing everything about her. Nicole detested that Mahmoud wanted her to cover her body even though she had converted and had to observe special dress rules as per Islam. She didn't like that Mahmoud asked her to cover her hair. She was not okay with Mahmoud asking her not to hug men. Nicole didn't like that every time she turned around, there was a new rule. It was her second time moving to Egypt when Nicole filmed the other way. Nicole was going to divorce, but she decided to get back together to see how it went. Nicole and Mahmoud were separated for 6 months, but she still thought about him every single day. Mahmoud was totally different than anybody she'd ever dated. He was not a tortured poet or art kind of man. He was a pure and honest person who stood up for what he believed in, which also attracted Nicole to him. She said he loved her like she'd never been loved before. Mahmoud did everything he could to make his wife feel comfortable living in Egypt. He even looked at adopting a cat to make Nicole feel at home. However, Nicole figured she wasn't certain about her future in Egypt or with Mahmoud. Her leaving had worried Mahmoud the most, and now Nicole asked him if he would leave Egypt to start a life with her in America. Mahmoud was worried about whether his religious beliefs and his Muslim faith would be accepted in the U.S. Mahmoud didn't know anything about life in Nicole's country. When Nicole should have made Mahmoud feel at home after he arrived in the U.S., she tried her best to make him feel uncomfortable. It looked like Nicole was taking revenge with her constant nitpicking and shaming Mahmoud. Nicole tried to kiss Mahmoud, even though he was clearly uncomfortable. She hung nude art on her bedroom wall and kept an undressed mannequin in her living room via SFGNSN 530. She was disrespectful when she hung a shower curtain with Hieronymus Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights, despite knowing her husband was extremely conservative. Nicole saw Mahmoud looking at a woman dressed in a hijab when she took him for a walk down the Santa Monica Pier. She blamed him for looking at the woman out of excitement by stopping dead in his tracks. She said she felt that she was not Muslim enough for him. Mahmoud chose to walk away from the situation even though he wasn't aware of his surroundings, just to defuse the situation. He later revealed he'd looked because she was the first Muslim person he spotted in America. Nicole was to meet her friends with Mahmoud, but they had a fight where she claimed Mahmoud was upset with the dress she chose to wear and threatened to divorce her. Nicole went out on her own and brought her friends back to the apartment even though Mahmoud wasn't in the mood to socialize. He had been sleeping and didn't appreciate the surprise. Nicole confronted Mahmoud in front of her friends, snapped at him, and berated him for saying he was going to get a divorce. Nicole also had alcohol in the house, which went against Mahmoud's religion. She told the cameras that Mahmoud was the crazy guy who wants to get a divorce over a dress. Nicole took aim at Mahmoud and disrespected him in front of her friends, proving she didn't respect Mahmoud's religion. Mahmoud kept saying he wasn't American and Nicole needed to understand that. However, Nicole provoked Mahmoud intentionally for her friends to see how illogical he was. During the latest 90-day Fiancé, Happily Ever After episode, Mahmoud told Nicole's friend Julian that he had been there just for 2 days and Nicole had embarrassed him. Later, Nicole saw Mahmoud looking at his suitcase and it triggered her. She yelled at him to get out of her house. Mahmoud began packing his bags, but she changed her mind suddenly and told him to stop. An annoyed Mahmoud picked up his luggage and headed out despite Nicole and Julian trying to stop him. Mahmoud eventually left the house without his bags with Julian following, begging him to stop.